On Christmas Eve, as a blizzard closed its hand around a quiet mountain town, a 9-year-old boy vanished between church bells and falling snow. His father, a police officer, searched the white streets believing he understood danger until the forest refused to answer and trained dogs would not move forward. What happened next did not begin with sirens or heroes, but with a silent girl, a scarred German shepherd, and a truth hidden beneath the snow. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about listening when fear is loud, about family stronger than law, and about the kind of miracles that arrive without warning. If this story finds you tonight, tell us where you are watching from in the comments. And if you believe in stories of hope, loyalty, and second chances, please press subscribe to support this YouTube channel and walk this journey with us. The blizzard began the way old gods begin their arguments, softly with a polite cough in the pine needles, then grew impatient and shut the world like a door slammed on a fragile thumb. Frostvale Ridge sat tucked into the ribs of the mountains, a small town built from timber, stubbornness, and the kind of faith that keeps coffee hot and porch steps shoveled even when winter tries to repossess the earth. On Christmas Eve, Main Street wore its golden lights the way a weary saint wears a borrowed crown, with dignity and a hint of defiance. The bulbs trembled in the wind, stretched into thin strands, almost like spider silk strung between the lampposts, and each gust snapped the glow into shivering pieces. Snow moved sideways, impatient as gossip, scraping along shop windows where painted wreaths smiled bravely at the storm. The church, an old wooden chapel with a steep roof and a bell tower that had outlived 3 pastors and 1 lightning strike, stood like the town's last match held against the dark. Inside, the children's choir had just finished the final carol. Their voices, high and bright, still lingered in the beams like little birds refusing to leave. The smell of pine boughs and melted candle wax clung to the pews. Someone had set out a table of peppermint candy and sugar cookies, and the whole room breathed like a kitchen, pretending it had never known hunger. Among the children filing out, Noah Carter stood out in the quiet way a candle stands out when everything else is shadow. He was 9 years old, small for his age, but wiry in the way kids get when they spend more time climbing snowbanks than sitting still. His hair was brown and perpetually messy, as if his thoughts kept running their hands through it. His eyes were bright, not in a loud way, but in the watchful way of a child who notices adults whispering behind doors and remembers the exact sound a sad person makes when they think no one is listening. Noah carried a sketchbook hugged tight to his chest, the corners softened from use. Drawing was how he translated the world when words felt too heavy. He drew when he was happy, when he was scared, and most often when he missed the mother he could barely talk about without his throat turning into a knot. If there was an event that shaped Noah's quietness, it wasn't a single dramatic moment so much as a long winter of small absences. A mother gone from the kitchen, a father often gone from the house, and the way grief makes even laughter feel like it needs permission. His father, Officer Samuel Carter, arrived late, again, and the town forgave him the way towns forgive their protectors, with sighs that sound like love and worry braided together. Samuel was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the sturdy build of a man who had hauled stranded motorists from ditches and carried elderly neighbors' groceries through snowdrifts without making a speech about it. His face was the sort that might have looked handsome in another life, but the years had carved it into something more serious. A jaw set like a latch, cheekbones tight from sleepless nights, and eyes that had learned to scan rooms the way wolves scan tree lines. He wore his uniform like armor, not out of pride, but out of necessity. The job had taught him how quickly ordinary evenings could turn into sirens. Loss had taught him something worse, how quickly a home could go silent. Tonight he looked wind-bitten and apologetic, breath steaming as he stepped into the church doorway. The urgent call that delayed him had been the kind that didn't care about carols, an accident up on the pass, a stranded driver, someone's blood pressure, and someone else's bad luck. He offered Noah a quick smile, meant to say, "I'm here now," even if the smile arrived slightly late too. Noah, used to his father's lateness the way he was used to winter's bite, didn't pout. He simply adjusted his grip on the sketchbook, nodded once, and glanced toward the street where the snow was thickening. Samuel promised he would be home soon. 5 minutes, 10 at most. Just had to swing by and check on something the dispatcher mentioned. Noah had walked the short route home 100 times, and the town between the church and the Carter house was familiar as a lullaby, The bakery with its frosted windows, the hardware store with a wooden moose over the door, the small park where the swings were buried in snow, like sleeping horses. Samuel, torn between duty and fatherhood, made a decision he would spend the rest of the night trying to rewrite. "Go on ahead," he told Noah. "Stay on the lit street. Don't cut behind the shops. Straight home." Noah's bright eyes flicked up, half obedience, half quiet calculation, and he said, "Okay, Dad," the way a child says, okay when he's trying to make it easy for the grown-up he loves. Then he stepped into the storm, his small boots crunching on snow that had started to pack hard like flour pressed into dough. The wreath pinned to his coat, a festive circle with a red ribbon, bobbed as he walked, a bright target in a world turning white. At first the walk felt normal. A few townspeople waved from doorways, faces bundled in scarves. A woman from the choir, middle-aged and round-cheeked, called out, "Merry Christmas, Noah!" And Noah lifted one mittened hand in reply without breaking stride. Snow stung his cheeks. The wind tugged at his hood like an impatient sibling. He kept the sketchbook pressed to his chest, not because he feared losing it, but because it made him feel anchored. The streetlights cast halos in the falling snow, and for a while the world was only the familiar hush of winter and the distant afterglow of music. Then, somewhere between one street lamp and the next, the air changed. It was subtle, the way a room changes when someone angry walks in. The wind carried a sharpness that wasn't just cold. Noah paused just for a breath, the way a deer pauses when it senses something it can't name. He looked down the road. The next pool of light wavered behind a curtain of snow. He took another step, and then the town lost him, as if the storm had swallowed a word mid-sentence. 15 minutes later, Samuel returned to the place he expected to find his son, home, and found instead an absence that felt too large to fit inside any room. Noah didn't answer when Samuel called his name. The kitchen was dark. The living room held the faint smell of pine and the untouched plate of cookies Samuel had promised they could share later. Samuel's heartbeat changed shape. He checked the porch, the yard, the street. He drove back toward the church, headlights carving tunnels through snow. He asked a neighbor, then another. No one had seen Noah arrive. Fear, when it lands, is never polite. It doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. Samuel found the end of Noah's trail near the last stretch of road, a place where the snow had drifted high against the curb. There, under the street lamp's shaking halo, was a mark in the snow, a dragged line like someone had been pulled, not walking, and a scrap of red ribbon lay half buried, torn from the wreath Noah wore. Samuel stared at that ribbon as if it were a severed thread from his own chest. He didn't just see snow. He saw a tear in his life, ragged and raw, opening wider with every breath. The search station went up fast, because small towns learn to move like a single body in emergencies. A portable floodlight blinked on near the church parking lot, throwing harsh white over swirling flakes. Deputies arrived in trucks, tires crunching. Volunteers brought thermoses and blankets. Radios crackled with clipped voices that sounded brave even when they weren't. Sergeant Ronan Pierce took charge of the coordination because that was what he did best when the world fell apart. Ronan was in his early 40s, lean and long-limbed, his face weathered like bark, his dark hair kept short beneath a knit cap. He carried himself with the calm of a man who had seen enough chaos to stop believing panic was useful. Years ago, he'd lost a partner in a roadside ambush in a different state. The scar of that night didn't show on his skin, but it lived in his carefulness, in the way he always checked exits, always listened twice before speaking once. Ronan's voice stayed low and steady as he assigned search grids and kept civilians out of harm's way. K-9 units were requested and arrived through the storm like cavalry from an older story. Handlers bundled in heavy gear, dogs eager and muscled, their breath steaming, paws punching into snow with purpose. One handler, a younger deputy with a freckled face and nervous energy, spoke in soft commands meant to reassure his dog as much as himself. The first dog, a strong German shepherd with sable fur and alert ears, leaned into the harness, nose down, ready to work. But the moment they reached the forest edge, the dog's behavior snapped sideways. It stopped, hackles rising, growled low, and backed away as if the dark between the trees had teeth. The second dog, a darker-coated shepherd, whined and shook its head like something stung its senses. The third, a mixed breed trained for tracking, flattened to the ground, ears pinned, refusing forward motion with a stubborn fear that didn't match its training. The handlers tried again, repositioned, offered calm words, even treats. The dogs wouldn't cross. The forest line might as well have been a cliff. Samuel watched this with disbelief that curdled into dread. Dogs didn't do that without a reason. Ronan crouched at the edge where the snow met the trees and sniffed the air, his eyes narrowing. He didn't have a dog's nose, but he had a detective's suspicion and a survivor's instinct. "There's something off," he murmured, voice barely audible beneath the wind. "A strange scent. Chemical. Like someone sprayed something." He looked at Samuel then, and even his steadiness couldn't soften the meaning. It could be meant to throw them off, or to scare them. Samuel's throat tightened. The cold needle of understanding pushed deeper. This wasn't a child wandering. This wasn't an accident. Someone had prepared for this, like a hunter laying a trap. The storm thickened, covering footprints as fast as they could form. The floodlight turned snow into a swarm of white insects. Volunteers shifted uneasily, their goodwill colliding with fear. Samuel stood at the boundary of town and forest, staring into the trees as if his stare could part them. He imagined Noah's small hands, his sketchbook, the red ribbon. His mind tried to bargain with the night. Take anything else. Not this, not my son, not on Christmas Eve. Far away the church bell rang once, just one heavy note, a sound like a door closing in a stone hallway. And in that same heartbeat of time, a black vehicle moved along the mountain road beyond the searchlights. It was sleek, too dark against the snow, sliding without hesitation. No license plates, no pause. Just a smear of ink across white, vanishing into the storm. Samuel's blood went colder than the air. Somewhere in Frostvale Ridge, the old stories about winter spirits and mountain shadows seemed less like superstition and more like warnings wearing different clothes. The town kept searching, and the storm kept erasing, and Christmas Eve tightened its grip as if it intended to keep its secret. The search station at Frostvale Ridge no longer felt like a place of hope. It felt like a wound held open by light. Flood lamps burned against the storm, turning the falling snow into a white, frantic veil, and every radio crackle sounded sharper, more brittle, as if words themselves might freeze mid-air. Volunteers shifted from foot to foot, stamping warmth into their boots, their breath rising in pale clouds. Some whispered prayers. Others stood silent, staring toward the forest line where the dogs had refused to go, as though the trees themselves had issued a warning no one dared translate aloud. Officer Samuel Carter stood near the edge of the light, his posture rigid, shoulders squared in a way that came less from authority now and more from fear held tightly in check. His face had gone strangely still, the way a lake does before cracking, and his eyes never left the dark road beyond the church parking lot, where the storm swallowed distance and time together. Grief had already taught Samuel how fast a life could change. Tonight was teaching him how cruelly it could repeat the lesson. Sergeant Ronan Pierce moved between deputies with quiet efficiency, his lean frame wrapped in a heavy coat, his voice steady as he reassigned search patterns that everyone knew were already being erased by snow. Ronan's calm was not optimism. It was discipline forged years earlier when panic had cost him someone he could not save. He believed in procedure the way some men believe in prayer, not because it guaranteed miracles, but because it gave chaos a shape that could be fought. The K-9 handlers stood a short distance away, frustration etched into their movements as they soothed their dogs, animals trained to trust their noses above all else, now shaken by something unseen. The scent barrier along the forest edge hung faintly in the air, sharp and unnatural, and every minute that passed felt like a door quietly closing. It was then, when the town seemed caught between breath and silence, that Sam heard footsteps approaching through the snow, light and deliberate, not the heavy crunch of boots rushing to help, but the careful cadence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. He turned sharply, one hand already lifting in reflex, and saw a figure emerge from the darkness beyond the reach of the floodlights. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, slim and slightly hunched against the cold, as if the wind had learned her name and used it often. Her coat was old but well kept, patched at the elbows, the color of faded pine needles. Dark hair spilled from beneath a wool cap, framing a face pale from cold, but composed in a way that immediately set her apart from the anxious crowd. Her eyes were a striking green, mossy, winter-dulled, yet steady, eyes that did not flinch when they met Samuel's. Beside her walked a large German shepherd, ash-gray and black, broad-chested and powerfully built, despite a visible stiffness in his gait. The dog moved. Without a leash, not because he was untrained, but because he did not need one. His ears were upright, his amber eyes alert, his muzzle dusted with snow. There was a scar along one hind leg, the fur there growing back darker, marking him as an animal who had known injury and survived it. He did not bark, did not lunge, did not cower. He simply stopped when she stopped and looked at Samuel with an intensity that felt uncomfortably like recognition. Ronan stepped forward at once, hand raised. "This area is restricted," he said, firm but not unkind. "You need to move back." The young woman did not argue. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and even, carrying just enough to cut through the wind. "You're looking in the wrong place," she said. "And your dogs, they're being lied to." Samuel bristled, exhaustion sharpening his temper. "Who are you?" he demanded. "This is an active search." She nodded once, acknowledging the weight of his words without yielding to them. "My name is Elena Wilder," she said. "I grew up on the South Ridge, and this," she glanced down briefly, "is Atlas." At the sound of his name, the German shepherd's ears twitched, but he did not move. Elena was 22 years old, though the lines of her composure suggested an older grief had passed through her life and decided to stay. She was not conventionally striking, but there was something arresting in the way she held herself, like someone accustomed to being ignored who had learned how to remain unbroken by it. People in town knew her vaguely, the quiet girl who lived near the abandoned cabins, the one who helped at the shelter years ago, the granddaughter of an old mountain surveyor who had died under circumstances few liked to discuss. Loss had shaped her into someone careful with words and fearless with truth. Samuel scoffed despite himself. "We have trained K9 units," he said. "We're doing everything by the book." Elena met his gaze, unblinking. "Then, the book you're using wasn't written for tonight." Ronan opened his mouth to intervene, but Elena lifted one gloved hand, not in challenge, but in invitation, and slowly opened her palm. Resting there was a small wooden button, carved with the shape of a tiny evergreen tree. The craftsmanship was simple, but unmistakable. Samuel's breath caught painfully. He knew that button. He had sewn it back onto Noah's favorite Christmas coat just last year, after it came loose. Before anyone could speak, Elena knelt and set the button gently on the hood of Samuel's cruiser, then reached into her pocket again. This time she produced a peppermint candy, its wrapper torn, crumbs of cookie clinging to it, damp from snow. "Your son likes to hide these," she said quietly. "He keeps them for later. Atlas found this near the road, not deep in the forest, at the edge where a vehicle stopped briefly." The world seemed to tilt. Samuel felt the night press closer, every sound dulling except the pounding in his ears. Evidence had weight, and this evidence smelled of sugar and memory and something unbearably human. Ronan swore under his breath. "How did you get that?" he asked. Elena straightened slowly. "Atlas did," she replied. "He doesn't track the way your dogs do." One of the handlers muttered something dismissive, but Atlas stepped forward then, just one measured step, placing himself between Elena and the raised voices. He did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He simply stood, a living barrier of muscle and resolve, and somehow that was more convincing than aggression ever could be. The handlers fell silent, unsettled despite themselves. Elena's voice softened, but its intensity deepened. "Someone sprayed chemicals along the forest edge," she said, "strong enough to burn the nose and confuse fear-trained responses. Your dogs are doing exactly what they were taught, protect themselves. Atlas was never trained that way." Samuel stared at the dog, at the scarred leg, at the calm that radiated from him. "Then how does he track?" Sam asked hoarsely. Elena hesitated for the first time, just a fraction of a second. "He listens," she said, "to the ground, to the wind, to what doesn't belong." Ronan shook his head. "This is highly irregular," he said, though doubt had crept into his certainty. "We can't base a search on—" "On what?" Elena interrupted gently. "On proof?" She gestured toward the button, the candy. "Your son left pieces of himself behind because he's smart, because he hoped someone would notice. The wind howled, rattling the church bell again, and snow thickened, erasing the road in soft, relentless strokes. Elena lowered her voice, speaking now only to Samuel, though everyone leaned in to hear. "If you want to find him before the storm buries everything," she said, "you have to go light. No radios, no engines. Sound carries wrong up there. And you have to trust, just once, that the mountain doesn't answer to rank." Samuel felt something inside him give way. Not hope exactly, but resistance. He thought of Noah's quiet eyes, his careful drawings, the way he'd said okay as if trying to protect his father from worry. He thought of his wife's voice years ago, warm and insistent. "Don't let him feel alone, Sam. Not ever." He looked at Ronan, who searched his face and found no recklessness there, only a father with nothing left to lose. "I'm going," Samuel said. Ronan exhaled slowly, then nodded. 15 minutes, he said. "I follow at distance. If this goes wrong—" Elena shook her head. "Too many footsteps," she said. "Too much noise. The storm will punish it." Sam met Ronan's eyes one last time. "Cover me," he said. Ronan clasped his shoulder once, hard and brief. Elena turned toward the dark road, Atlas moving at her side like a shadow given purpose. Samuel followed, leaving behind the floodlights, the radios, the fragile comfort of rules. Behind them, Frostvale Ridge held its breath. Ahead, the mountain waited, patient and ancient, already keeping Noah's secret. They left the last pool of floodlight behind like a shore receding from a swimmer who had already gone too far to turn back. The wind closed around them almost immediately, swallowing the human noises of Frostvale Ridge, radios, engines, anxious voices, and replacing them with the older sounds of the mountain, the hiss of snow across stone, the low creak of frozen trees shifting under weight, the distant crack of ice settling into itself. Samuel Carter felt the absence of those man-made sounds more sharply than he expected. For years his life had been measured in dispatch tones and sirens. Now there was only breath, footfall, and the faint, deliberate movement of a German shepherd ahead of him. Elena Wilder walked first, her steps careful but unhesitating, as though the path revealed itself to her in a language she had learned long ago. She did not rush, nor did she linger. Atlas moved beside her with an ease that belied his size, his scarred legs stiff but strong, each step placed as if chosen rather than forced. Sam followed a few paces behind, his gloved hand brushing the grip of his sidearm out of habit, though he knew instinctively that whatever waited ahead would not respect badges or bullets. Ronan Pierce had kept his promise, shadowing them for the first stretch, his tall frame visible between trees like a sentry made of patience. After 15 minutes, Elena stopped and turned, lifting 2 fingers in a silent signal. Ronan hesitated, then nodded once and faded back into the storm, trusting Sam to survive what procedure could not follow. The forest thickened as they moved, branches heavy with snow, bowing inward like old men whispering secrets. After only a few hundred yards, Sam felt the familiar buzz in his pocket die. He checked his phone out of reflex and saw the screen freeze, then spin uselessly before going black. He tried the GPS unit clipped to his belt. The arrow twitched, spun, and pointed nowhere. Even the radio, which he had kept on low despite Elena's warning, dissolved into static so sharp it made his teeth ache. He switched it off. "Magnetic interference," Elena said quietly, as if responding to his thoughts. "There's a band of iron-rich stone under this slope. Locals call it the mountain's heart ring. Compasses lie here. Machines panic." Sam frowned. "And you?" he asked. Elena glanced back, a faint, almost sad smile touching her mouth. "I remember," she said. That answer would have sounded mystical in another mouth, but from her it felt practical, almost inevitable. As they climbed, Elena pointed out details Sam would have missed even in daylight. The snow near the trees was compressed in odd patches, not by animals, but by something heavy that had paused, shifted weight, then moved on. There were faint streaks where snow had melted and refrozen, carrying with it a bitter chemical smell that stung Sam's nose now that he was closer. "Spray," Elena said, strong enough to confuse fear-trained. "Dogs. Whoever did this knows canine behavior. They wanted the search to stop at the forest edge." Atlas sniffed briefly at one such patch, then lifted his head, ears angling toward the slope above them. He did not linger on the scent. Instead, he watched the way the wind bent the branches, the way drifting snow caught briefly against a rock before sliding free. Sam watched the dog, trying to reconcile this method with everything he had been taught. "He doesn't track like police dogs," Elena said, anticipating the question. "Atlas was trained for search and rescue years ago. Avalanche work, lost hikers. But he was labeled difficult." Sam glanced at the scarred leg. "Because of the injury?" "Because he doesn't obey blindly," Elena replied. "He questions. If a command doesn't match what the ground tells him, he freezes. Trainers called it disobedience. I call it honesty." The words landed heavily. Sam thought of his own career, of times he had followed orders that later haunted him, of rules that protected systems more than people. Atlas stopped suddenly, nose lifted. Elena crouched, one hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder, not restraining, just grounding. "This way," she murmured, and veered off what Sam would have sworn was the most logical path. They descended slightly, moving against the wind rather than with it. Sam struggled to understand until Elena explained, "The wind lies less when you face it. It carries what happened, not what's coming." Minutes later, Atlas paused again. This time he lowered his head and nudged something half buried beneath a rock. Sam's breath caught as Elena pulled free a damp scrap of paper. It was a torn page from a sketchbook, the edges softened by snow. On it, drawn in unsteady pencil lines, was a Christmas tree, crooked but unmistakable, and beside it, 3 small circles, linked by lines like hands held. Sam recognized his son's drawing instantly. Noah always drew people as circles first, then decided later who they were. "He's leaving markers," Sam whispered. Elena nodded. "Not perfect ones," she said. "Just enough." They moved on, finding more signs that would have meant nothing to anyone not taught to look twice. A branch bent and placed deliberately across another, forming a rough arrow, a shallow scratch on a tree trunk, too high for an animal, just within reach of a child stretching upward. Each sign tightened the invisible thread, pulling them forward. As they climbed toward a steeper section, Sam's chest burned, partly from exertion, partly from the pressure building behind his ribs. He had spent years believing his strength was enough, that being a good cop and a decent father would somehow balance the scales. Now, following the trail of his son's small, brave decisions, he felt that belief fracture. Noah hadn't waited passively to be saved. He had participated in his own survival. "He's telling us something," Sam said. Elena slowed. "He's telling you not to go alone," she replied. "The 3 circles. He wants you to find allies." The irony was sharp enough to taste. Sam had always prided himself on handling things himself, on being the one others leaned on. Now, his son was teaching him the opposite lesson in pencil and snow. The forest thinned as they approached an abandoned cabin half buried against a rock face. The structure sagged under years of neglect, its door hanging crooked, its windows blind with frost. Atlas stiffened, hackles rising, not in fear, but in alertness. "Someone passed through here recently," Elena said, touching the snow near the threshold. "Heavy boots, 1-foot drags." Sam scanned the area and spotted the marks too, his training finally aligning with hers. Nearby, faint tracks curved toward a narrow service road, almost erased by drifting snow. And there, barely visible, were the shallow impressions of tires that had braked hard, then accelerated away. The black car. The confirmation sent a chill deeper than the cold. Elena's old satellite phone vibrated suddenly in her pocket, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. She stiffened, then answered and set it on speaker. The voice that came through was smooth, amused, threaded with cruelty sharpened by intelligence. "Welcome back to the mountain, Elena." Sam felt the words land like a blow. He recognized the tone immediately. Victor Hale. He had arrested the man in autumn, a smug trafficker who smiled even in handcuffs. Hale had walked free weeks later on technicalities that left Sam furious and hollow. "Hale," Sam said, unable to stop himself. There was a pause, then laughter. "Officer Carter," Hale replied. "Merry Christmas." Elena's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "What do you want?" Hale didn't bother with denial. "You know what I want," he said. "What your grandfather hid. Maps, deeds, proof. You're the only one who can read his markings. The boy was simply Leverage. The word made Sam's vision blur red. Hale continued, savoring every syllable. You thought moving to a quiet town would keep your son safe, Carter. Thought Christmas would make you soft. Let's see how well you protect him now. A sound followed, a recording. Noah's voice, thin with cold, a small hitch in his breathing. He wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. Sam lunged forward instinctively, but Elena caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't let him set your pace, she said softly. In the forest, whoever loses rhythm dies first. Her hand trembled despite her calm words. Sam realized then that Elena wasn't fearless. She was practiced. She had been hurt before, badly enough to learn how to stand anyway. Hale ended the call with a promise thinly veiled as a threat. The phone went dead. Snow fell heavier, thickening the silence. Sam closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to breathe. When he opened them, Atlas was watching him intently, tail low but steady. The dog seemed to wait, not for orders, but for honesty. Sam straightened. We keep going, he said. Elena nodded once. Yes, she replied. Now we know where the story turns. Above them, the mountain listened, ancient and unmoved, while three figures pressed deeper into its memory, following a child's courage written in snow. The cabin behind them sagged into silence as Sam, Elena, and Atlas moved on, leaving its rotting timbers to the storm. Snow thickened, falling heavier now, each flake like a small erasure, determined to wipe the night clean of evidence. The mountain grew steeper, the forest tighter, trunks rising close together like ribs around a single, fragile heart. Sam felt the climb in his lungs and legs, but more than that, he felt it in his chest. Each step driven by the image of his son's breath fogging in the cold, by the sound of Noah's voice in that recording, steady and frightened all at once. They stopped beneath a cluster of fir trees where the wind bent sharply, funneling through a narrow cut in the rock. Elena knelt, pressing her gloved hand to the snow, her fingers tracing something invisible. He waited here, she said. Not long, long enough to listen. Sam scanned the ground and saw it too now. The snow was scuffed, not by panic, but by restraint. Heavy boots. One print deeper than the other. Someone injured, or someone favoring a leg. The trail angled uphill toward a ridge that overlooked the old mining area on the far side of Frostvale Ridge. Atlas stood still, head tilted, ears flicking. He wasn't following scent now, Sam could tell. The dog's attention was fixed on something farther off, something that did not belong to the forest's natural rhythm. Lights, Sam murmured. Faint, intermittent glows pulsed through the trees ahead, quickly masked, then visible again. Too steady for stars, too deliberate for lightning. Elena's jaw tightened. Generators, she said. Portable. Someone set up camp. The realization landed heavily. Whoever had taken Noah wasn't improvising. This wasn't a desperate act carried out in panic. It was planned, staged, and staged close. Sam thought of the black car slipping through town earlier, of Hale's smug voice on the phone. The villain hadn't come from outside Frostvale Ridge. He had already been there, watching, waiting, letting the town decorate itself for Christmas while he prepared his trap. As they moved closer, the terrain changed. Snow thinned in places, packed hard by repeated footsteps. The chemical sting returned faintly, though weaker now, mixed with oil and metal. Atlas slowed, muscles taut, his scarred leg flexing carefully as he navigated the uneven ground. Sam noticed how Elena adjusted her pace to match the dog's, never forcing him faster than he chose. It struck Sam then that Elena did not command Atlas. She conversed with him in a language built on trust and shared loss. They reached the edge of a rocky outcrop overlooking a shallow valley. Below, partially hidden by snow-covered equipment and tarps, lay the skeletal remains of the old copper mine, long abandoned, officially sealed years ago after structural failures. A few harsh white lights illuminated sections of the area, throwing long, distorted shadows across the snow. Sam counted at least 4 figures moving below, bundled, armed. The sight made his stomach drop. Too many, he whispered. Elena did not answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the mine entrance, where a makeshift barrier had been erected. Floodlights, wire, a vehicle parked at an angle for cover. He wants us to see it, she said finally. Victor Hale doesn't hide when he thinks he's winning. He performs. As if summoned by his name, Elena's satellite phone vibrated again. She inhaled once, steadying herself, and answered. Hale's voice came through clear and pleased. "You found the stage," he said. "I was beginning to worry the mountain had eaten you." Sam leaned closer, his breath shallow. "Where is my son?" Hale chuckled softly. "Safe enough, cold, but alive, for now." Elena spoke before Sam could. "You don't need him anymore," she said. "You have me." Hale laughed outright. "Oh, I need both of you," he replied. "You see, leverage works best when it hurts everyone involved." His tone shifted then, sharpening. "Your grandfather was a clever man, Elena. Hid his records well. Deeds, survey maps, proof of what really sits under this mountain. Proof that would ruin certain people who paid me well to make it disappear. You're the only one who can read his markings. That makes you valuable." "And Noah," Sam demanded. There was a pause. Hale let it stretch, savoring it. "The boy," he said at last, "is the bell that pulled you both out here. A reminder that laws are fragile things when family is involved." Another pause, then the sound of a recording playing again. Noah's breathing, uneven. A small cough he tried to stifle. Sam's vision tunneled. His hands shook. For a heartbeat, instinct screamed at him to run downhill, guns blazing, consequences damned. Elena caught his arm again, firmer this time. "Listen to me," she said quietly, her face pale, eyes fierce. "He wants you to lose time, lose control. He wants you loud and reckless." Her hand trembled now, no longer hidden. Sam saw the truth then. Elena had faced men like Hale before. Maybe not him specifically, but his kind. Men who took what they wanted and called it business. Men who left scars that never quite healed. Her calm was not indifference, it was survival. Hale's voice returned, almost conversational. "Here's how this goes," he said. "Elena comes in alone, Carter stays outside, the dog leaves, I get what I want, then maybe I let the boy walk back out to you." Sam clenched his jaw. "And if we don't?" Hale's amusement cooled. "Then the mountain keeps its Christmas present." The call ended. Snow fell thicker, muffling the lights below, turning the mine into a ghostly island in a white sea. Sam crouched behind the rock, chest heaving. He felt smaller than he had in years, reduced to a single terrible choice. Elena sank down beside him, her shoulders sagging slightly now that the call was over. Atlas pressed close to her leg, offering warmth and steady presence. "This is a trap," Sam said hoarsely. "A clean one." Elena nodded. "Yes," she replied. "And he thinks it's perfect." She looked at Sam then, really looked at him, as if weighing something invisible. "But traps depend on predictability," she added, "on people behaving the way they're expected to." Sam stared down at the mine, at the armed figures pacing in rehearsed confidence. He thought of Noah's drawing, the 3 circles beside the Christmas tree. He thought of Ronan waiting somewhere behind them, trusting Sam to do the impossible. He thought of the oath he had taken as an officer, and the unspoken oath he had taken as a father. Slowly, deliberately, Sam unclipped his radio and set it aside in the snow. Then he reached for his gun. Elena stiffened, until she saw what he was doing. He didn't raise it. He didn't check the chamber. He placed it on the ground beside the radio. "I'm done playing his game," Sam said, his voice low but steady. He stood, lifting his hand slightly, and called out toward the mine. "Hale, you want me? I'm coming in." A murmur rippled below as figures turned, lights shifting. Sam continued, forcing each word into calm. "I'll come with Elena. You release my son first." Laughter echoed up the slope, thin and sharp. "You think you're negotiating?" Hale called back. "I think I'm changing the rules," Sam replied. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a gunshot cracked the night, not aimed, not precise. A warning shot from one of Hale's men, young and nervous. The bullet sliced past Atlas, close enough to tear fur. The dog yelped once, more in surprise than pain, and then moved, not to attack, not to flee. Atlas surged forward with sudden, breathtaking speed, closing the distance to the nearest guard in seconds, jaws clamping down on the man's weapon hand with controlled force. The gun fell uselessly into the snow. Chaos erupted. shouts, lights swinging wildly. In that instant, Elena raised a small metal whistle to her lips and blew, not loudly but sharply, a piercing note that cut through the storm. From the forest edges beyond the mine, shapes shifted. Dogs, feral half-trained rescues Elena had once helped rehabilitate, emerged from the shadows, and farther still, the distant silhouettes of wolves appeared, not attacking, but watching, unsettling the men below. Sam did not hesitate. He ran, not toward the main entrance, but toward a narrow side path he remembered from a childhood tour of the mine. A forgotten access tunnel Noah himself had drawn once in his sketchbook after a school trip. Elena followed. Atlas limped after them, fierce and loyal. Above, the mountain watched as the trap began to crack. The side tunnel swallowed them the moment they slipped inside, the noise of gunfire and shouting outside collapsing into a dull, distant echo. Darkness pressed close, thick with the smell of rust, damp stone, and old oil, the scent of a place that had once been alive with labor and had then been abandoned to regret. Sam's shoulder scraped the rock wall as he ran, breath tearing from his lungs, boots skidding on frozen gravel. Elena moved ahead of him now, no longer cautious, her earlier restraint replaced by urgency, sharpened into clarity. Atlas followed, limping but relentless, nails clicking against stone, every step a declaration that pain would not decide the outcome. The tunnel sloped downward, uneven and narrow, reinforced in places by rotting timber beams that groaned softly as if remembering the weight they once carried. Sam's flashlight beam cut through the dark and jagged sweeps, catching glints of mineral veins in the rock. Old warning signs bleached to ghosts of yellow and black. His mind raced faster than his body. Hale had chosen this place deliberately. Mines were perfect theaters, multiple entrances, blind corners, echoing acoustics that distorted direction and distance. A maze that rewarded whoever knew its history best. Left, Elena whispered sharply, skidding to a stop at a fork where the main tunnel continued straight and a narrower passage branched off, partially collapsed. Sam hesitated only a fraction of a second before following her. "How do you know?" he asked between breaths. Elena didn't look back. "My grandfather mapped this mine before it closed," she said. "He taught me which tunnels were lies." That single sentence carried years of history Sam could not yet unpack. Long nights of lessons by lantern light, an old man's distrust of official records. A legacy of knowledge passed down because it couldn't be trusted to survive anywhere else. They moved deeper. The air grew colder, heavier. Somewhere ahead, Sam heard a faint sound that stopped his heart. A child's cough, echoing weakly through stone. "Noah," Sam breathed. Atlas heard it too. The dog surged forward, ignoring Elena's hissed caution, driven by something older than training. Sam followed, muscles screaming, fear sharpening every sense until the world narrowed to one purpose. They burst into a wider chamber lit by a single hanging lamp. The sight froze Sam mid-step. Noah sat inside an old ore cart, wrapped in a thin blanket. His small body hunched, cheeks flushed with cold. His wrists were free, but the cart itself was wedged behind fallen rock, positioned like a cage without bars. Noah looked up when he heard footsteps, eyes widening, not in panic, but in relief so sudden it was almost painful to witness. "Dad," Noah said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I did the arrows, like Elena showed me." The words struck Sam harder than any blow. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the cart, hands trembling as he reached for his son. Noah leaned into him immediately, small fingers gripping Sam's coat with fierce determination. Sam pressed his forehead to Noah's, breathing him in, grounding himself in the simple miracle of warmth and life. For one precious second, the world fell silent. Then slow applause echoed from the far side of the chamber. Victor Hale stepped into the light, a gun loose in his hand, his smile polished and cruel. He was taller than Sam remembered, or perhaps menace had a way of stretching people. His coat was expensive, his boots clean despite the mine's filth. A man who refused to let environments change him. Behind him, 2 armed men emerged from the shadows, faces tense, eyes darting between Atlas and the tunnel entrances. "Touching," Hale drawled. "Truly, Christmas reunions always get me." He raised the gun slightly, casual but unmistakably ready. "Step away from the boy, Carter." Sam rose slowly, positioning himself instinctively between Hale and Noah. Elena stepped to Sam's side, shoulders squared, despite the fear flickering briefly across her face. Atlas planted himself in front of them, body low, teeth bared now, not in rage, but in warning. "You already lost," Hale continued, unfazed. "You just don't know which way yet." His gaze slid to Elena. "Hand over what I want, and this ends clean. You don't, and the mountain closes its mouth." Before anyone could respond, a low rumble shuddered through the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. Sam's stomach dropped. Hale smiled wider. "Insurance?" he said. "I triggered a minor charge earlier. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind us how fragile this place is." The choice slammed into Sam with brutal clarity. If he rushed Hale, the gun would fire. If he hesitated, the mountain itself might finish the job. Elena felt it too. Sam saw it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way her hand drifted unconsciously toward the pocket where the old maps were hidden. "This is the moment," she said softly, not to Hale, but to Sam. "The trap with two blades." Sam closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. He thought of the law, of how often he had believed it could hold everything together if enforced firmly enough. He thought of his wife, of the night she'd died, how helpless he had felt, waiting for rules and procedures that arrived too late. And he thought of Noah's drawing, the 3 circles, not hero, not sacrifice, alliance. He opened his eyes and did something Victor Hale had never planned for. He spoke, not with authority, but with truth. "You don't want to kill anyone here," Sam said calmly. "Not really. Dead men don't negotiate, and dead mountains bury evidence." He gestured subtly toward the cracked ceiling. "You blow this place, you lose the leverage you paid for." Hale's smile flickered, just for an instant. Sam pressed on. "You want Elena's knowledge because you can't replace it, and you want me standing still because you think I'm predictable." He shook his head slowly. "You're wrong." At that exact moment, Atlas moved, not in a reckless charge, but in a calculated arc, circling behind one of Hale's men, with a speed that came from instinct honed by rescue work, not attack training. The guard reacted too late. Atlas clamped down on the man's wrist, twisting sharply. The gun clattered to the ground. The chamber erupted. Shouts. A second gun fired wildly, the bullet ricocheting off stone. Elena threw herself over Noah instinctively as Sam lunged forward. Hale fired, but the shot went wide as Atlas slammed into his leg, jaws locking with surgical precision on Hale's forearm. Hale screamed, the sound raw and human, stripped of performance. The gun fell. Another rumble shook the chamber, stronger this time. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Stones rained down, blocking the tunnel behind Hale. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding. The mine was doing what mines always did when men grew arrogant. It was closing. Sam grabbed Hale's dropped gun and kicked it away, pinning Hale to the ground as Atlas released him and backed off, teeth still bared. Hale struggled once, then froze as another section of tunnel collapsed behind him, sealing off his escape completely. The remaining guard dropped to his knees, hands raised, terror finally outweighing loyalty. Elena coughed, blood blooming on her shoulder where a falling stone had struck her. Sam noticed only after he had Noah safely in his arms, shielding the boy with his own body as the last of the debris settled. The chamber fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the hiss of dust and the distant howl of wind through new cracks in the mountain. "It's over," Sam said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. Outside, emergency lights flared as Ronan and the remaining deputies arrived, drawn by the noise and Elena's whistle echoing faintly through the tunnels. Hale was arrested, his screams replaced by silence and cuffs. The mine was officially declared unstable, slated for permanent closure by morning. As they were let out into the snow-dimmed dawn, Noah clung to Sam's neck, exhausted but alive. Atlas limped beside them, blood spotting the snow lightly from his wounded leg. Elena walked last, supported by Ronan, her face pale but resolute. Christmas morning broke over Frostvale Ridge not with bells, but with breath, visible, fragile, and deeply grateful. Dawn did not arrive all at once. It seeped into Frostvale Ridge the way forgiveness does, slowly, almost cautiously, turning the night's violence into shapes that could finally be named. Snow fell softer now, the storm's anger spent, flakes drifting down like feathers shaken from a pillow. The mountain exhaled, sirens wound down to murmurs, boots crunched with purpose rather than panic. In the pale blue light, the old mine looked smaller, less theatrical. Its broken mouth rhymed with ice as if ashamed of what it had tried to keep. Noah Carter woke to warmth before he woke to sound. He was wrapped in a thermal blanket that smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine, his cheek pressed against his father's shoulder. Samuel Carter sat rigid in a folding chair beside a gurney in the ambulance bay, his arms locked around his son as if the world might try to take him back if he loosened his grip. Sam's face was gray with exhaustion, eyes bloodshot, beard rimed with melted snow and dust. He had not slept. He had not blinked much either. He simply breathed in time with Noah, counting each rise and fall like a prayer he could finally finish. Paramedics moved with gentle efficiency. One of them, a woman in her 40s with laugh lines etched deep from years of telling frightened people they were going to be okay, checked Noah's vitals again and smiled. "He's a tough one," she said. "Little dehydrated, cold, but he's strong." Noah's eyes fluttered open, brown and bright even now, and found his father's. "Dad," he whispered, voice scratchy. Sam bent forward until their foreheads touched. "I'm here," he said, the words breaking open inside his chest like a dam. "I'm right here." Noah nodded, satisfied, and drifted back towards sleep, his small fingers still hooked in Sam's jacket as if anchoring a boat. A few yards away, Elena Wilder sat on the edge of a stretcher, her injured shoulder bandaged, her coat folded neatly beside her. She looked smaller without the storm around her, her dark hair pulled back in a loose tie, her face pale but composed. The medics had offered her a blanket twice. She had declined once out of habit and accepted the second time with a faint, grateful smile. Years of living close to winter had taught her which kindnesses could be refused and which should not be. Atlas lay at her feet, his wounded leg cleaned and wrapped, his massive head resting on his paws. His eyes followed every movement, alert even in rest, until Elena's hand found the thick fur between his ears. Then he sighed, a deep sound like a door closing on a long night. Atlas was 6 years old enough to have learned that survival did not always look like victory, young enough to believe loyalty could still change outcomes. His scarred leg twitched occasionally as he dreamed, perhaps of buried voices and open hands. Sergeant Ronan Pierce stood nearby, speaking quietly into his radio, coordinating the last of the arrests. In the early light, Ronan looked older than he had the night before, the lines around his eyes deepened by responsibility finally allowed to rest. He had blood on his glove, someone else's, and snow melting into it, turning it pink. When he finished, he walked over to Sam and rested a hand briefly on the ambulance door. It was not an embrace. Ronan was not a man who reached for those easily. But it was something close. "He's going to be okay," Ronan said, nodding toward Noah. "You did good." Sam swallowed. "We did," he replied, glancing toward Elena and Atlas. Ronan followed his gaze and nodded again. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." Victor Hale was led past them in cuffs, his arms splinted, his expensive coat ruined by dust and blood. He did not look at Sam. His performance was over. There was nothing left to sell. Deputies loaded him into a cruiser, and with him went the thread that had stitched together bribes and threats and hidden agreements in Frostvale Ridge. By mid-morning, warrants would unravel the rest. The mine would be sealed permanently. The mountain would keep its secrets without being asked to bargain for them again. As the sun climbed, the town gathered in small, careful knots. Neighbors who had stood awake all night, now blinking in the light, clutching coffee cups and each other. Someone brought a cardboard box of donuts that tasted like relief. Someone else began hanging a fresh wreath on the church door, its ribbon red as a promise renewed. The bell rang once more, not as an alarm this time, but as an announcement that the night had ended. Inside the small hospital, where hallways smelled of antiseptic and pine air freshener, Christmas tried again. A modest tree stood in the lobby, its lights blinking unevenly, ornaments donated over the years by people who had once been patients. Noah lay propped against pillows, sipping warm broth, his color returning. Sam sat beside him, finally allowing himself to lean back, the chair creaking under the weight of a man who had carried too much and could at last set it down. Elena entered quietly with Atlas at her side, moving carefully because of her shoulder. Noah's eyes brightened. "Atlas," he said, a smile spreading despite the soreness. He reached for the dog, and Atlas rose, tail thumping once, then again, careful to keep his injured leg steady. Noah laughed softly and looped a strand of silver tinsel, liberated from the tree by a sympathetic nurse, around Atlas's neck like a medal. "For finding me," Noah said. Elena laughed too, a sound that surprised her with its ease. Her eyes filled, but she did not wipe them away. "He's not a pet," she said, voice warm. "He's a vow." Sam watched this. Something loosening in him that he had not known was knotted. For years after his wife's death, he had believed that vigilance was love, that if he watched closely enough, listened hard enough, nothing else would be taken. He saw now the quiet arrogance in that belief. Protection was not a solo act. Survival was not a badge pinned to one chest. It was a web, strong because it connected. He stood and approached Elena, extending his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Elena took it, her grip firm despite the bandage. "You listened," she replied. "That's rarer than you think." Later, when the ward quieted and the nurses dimmed the lights, Sam stepped into the lobby alone. The tree's uneven glow reflected in the glass doors, and beyond them, snow fell in patient spirals. Sam bowed his head, not in victory, not in bargaining, but in humility. He did not ask for miracles anymore. He asked for steadiness, for the wisdom to hear help when it came, for the courage to accept it. Outside, Frostvale Ridge returned to itself. Plows cleared roads, coffee brewed, children pressed noses to windows. The town learned what had happened in pieces, then as a whole, and something subtle shifted. Not pride exactly, but resolve. The law had done its work, yes, but it had done it best when it remembered why it existed. By afternoon, Noah slept again, safe. Elena prepared to leave, her maps and papers still tucked away, their meaning intact now that the threat had passed. Ronan promised follow-up, protection, transparency. Atlas rose when Elena did, moving with careful strength, his eyes scanning the room once more before settling. At the door, Elena paused. "The mountain opened because you listened?" she said to Sam. "Remember that?" Sam nodded. He would. When the sun set that evening, it did so gently, painting the snow rose and gold. Bells rang, doors opened. Frostvale Ridge exhaled into Christmas, carrying with it a lesson the storm had carved deep and clean. Human laws matter, but the law of family is older. And in winter, when the night is long and the road disappears, those who learn to listen will find the forest making room for their steps. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. They arrive quietly through a loyal dog that refuses to abandon a child, through a father who learns that strength also means listening, and through a wounded soul who chooses compassion over fear. In our daily lives, we all face winters of the heart, moments of loss, loneliness, exhaustion, and doubt. Times when the road ahead disappears and we feel small and unprepared. Yet God never leaves us alone in the storm. He sends help through unexpected people, gentle signs and moments that ask us to trust. This story reminds us that family is sacred, that love is stronger than law, and that faith grows, not when we control everything, but when we open our hearts and listen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story made you feel and where you are watching from. If you believe that God still sends quiet miracles into our lives, please type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and healing in every season. And please remember to press subscribe to support this YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of faith, hope, and redemption. Thank you for being part of this journey.